And we're live.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to CelloChat, the first CelloChat of 2021. Happy New Year. My name is Emily Taubl, and I'm coming to you from a very snowy, cold Burlington, Vermont, which has been a lovely place to be during the pandemic. Social distancing isn't terribly hard, and we have all this beautiful nature to enjoy. So it's been a very nice place to be during this time. I teach at the University of Vermont, and privately, I'm the principal cellist of the Springfield Symphony in Massachusetts, and I am the director of the Conservatory Audition Workshop. The Conservatory Audition Workshop is a program designed specifically to help high school students prepare for conservatory auditions. And it meets for 2 week-long sessions every August here in Burlington. And we have students come from around the world, faculty from all over the country, and it's really just an amazing time where students can play mock auditions to get ready. They have lessons, and they also have this great time to connect with teachers with discussions. They can bring their questions to each individual faculty member and hear about their schools. So it's a really lovely program for students to take advantage of when they're getting ready for the conservatory audition process. So yeah, that's really where my passions lie, is helping students prepare for this and navigate the conservatory process, not only just to get ready for the audition itself, but to help them navigate the process as a whole by choosing a teacher, choosing a school, and helping to get them to ultimately to their goals. And it's really been a great project and something I'm really enjoying working on every year. So today, I wanted to talk about ideas for keeping audition repertoire feeling good and inspired, where there's this awkward downtime between you've submitted your pre-screens and then you have to keep that repertoire feeling great all the way through till February and March, which can be very challenging. So I wanted to address and give some tips for keeping your repertoire feeling good, as well as some ideas that I have just to share about how to choose a school once your offers come in, and that process is finally over and you get to evaluate where you see yourself spending 4 years or 2 years or whatever degree you're going into. So I wanted to share some thoughts about that. But I also want to answer any questions you have about technique or just musical questions. I'm happy to answer them. So please do put them through the chat and we'll get to them along the way. Just a fun fact, I actually worked for Cello Bello back in the day when I was a student at NEC with Paul Katz. I was very fortunate to get to study with him for 2 degrees at NEC, and had just a phenomenal experience studying with him, and working for Cello Bello was, I don't think I was particularly good at it, but I did my best. And it was really inspiring to be emailing with teachers and professors that were so inspiring to me and influential in my life as a cellist, and to be collecting their blogs and doing editing and social media things. It was really an amazing time and a great job during school. And so it's really an honor and a fun privilege to be able to join you today for my first cello chat all these years later after working on them so many times. So a thank you to Paul Katz and also all the Cello Bello staff for helping make this possible, because I do know how much work goes into all of it in the background. So I just want to thank everyone. So to get started, I really wanted to start about keeping repertoire feeling inspired. I think it's a challenge, actually, no matter if it's audition time or if you're a musician at any point in your career. So actually, as a student getting ready for auditions, this is a nice look into the world of being a professional musician. So as a musician, often if you're in a chamber ensemble, you pick your repertoire at the beginning of the season, and then you're going to rotate in and out of a handful of pieces but your repertoire for that full season will stay fairly consistent. And the challenge is, of course, keeping it fresh every single time you get on stage, and that's not easy. And the same applies really if you play with multiple orchestras. You will find years where you are playing a whole lot of Symphonie Fantastique, and then years where you're playing multiple Beethoven nines. So it's just kind of par for the course in being a musician, and our job is to bring that creative spirit and that true deep love of the music, but also kind of a fresh take on it every time we perform, because it's art that's live, right? And so when you're getting ready for your auditions, I think it's really important to remember that this is practical use as well. So during audition season specifically, keeping all that repertoire in top shape, but not getting bored with it, is a tough challenge. You've probably been working on it for over a year. You've made your pre-screen recordings. You've had so many lessons. You might have even stopped really hearing your teacher at this point. You've heard so much about this specific repertoire. And then, of course, you have to push through to the final actual audition process. And it can be very challenging. And this year, possibly even harder than ever, due to the isolation of COVID. And you, for instance, may not have been able to be seeing your teacher in person, or not often. You probably haven't had access to studio classes consistently as maybe you used to. Orchestras and chamber groups are having a hard time getting together. So, you know, it's definitely a challenging time. And I know you know that, and we've all said it a lot of times, but this audition season will be one to remember for sure. And as you kind of navigate it and conquer it, I think you should remember that this will be one that you can tell your grandkids you played auditions during a pandemic, so you can have your hero story later, how you navigated. So I think today I just want to share some tips that I have, ideas for keeping that repertoire feeling good and excited and fresh every time you either make a recording or step into that live Zoom audition. So the first tip I have is to really start recording yourself early in the process. And this is sort of general advice, not just for someone who's going to have an audition that's recorded, but honestly, if I could just go back in time and give myself the advice, or I was given this advice, but I didn't take it. I wish I could go back and take it, of recording myself regularly, especially with, you know, the access to a cell phone with a camera, or a computer or an iPad. Making recordings earlier in the process of preparing for things would have been a really helpful tool. And not only just for, again, submitting something, but to hone in on what's actually happening in your playing, whether that's posture issues. I tend to find tension hiding in places that I'm not aware of, sometimes in my face. Sometimes my shoulders are a little too high, or one arm is a little bit too high. Or sometimes just, you know, little things as far as just, you know, are your feet are on the floor, or your bow, is it really straight? And, you know, the camera, it's obviously, it's honesty hour when you use it to your advantage. And, you know, between the camera and practicing in a mirror, you can really learn a lot. And sometimes what you perceive to be happening as you're playing, you know, we're so busy analyzing the shifts and the vibrato and the bow speed and all the things. Of course, we're thinking musically as well. We're trying to make shapes. We're trying to play in tune. Sometimes what we think is happening is not actually what it sounds like. So I have been shocked many times to listen back to a recording and think, oh, I did not hear that when I was playing. I thought I was so in tune, and yet consistently there's this problem. Paul Katz used to have this great saying. He would say to us, imagine you have ears as big as an elephant, and your ears are just sucking up all the sound. And I have never forgotten that. And I use that image with my students all the time, because it really is important to remember that your perception can be a little bit different than really what's happening. So activating your ears as much as possible, and then listening back is super helpful. Another tip I would have is to actually work on making yourself nervous. For me, COVID has been isolating in a way that I'm practicing a lot and I'm feeling fine as being in shape. But it's sort of in this little bubble of my room here, my studio, and I teach in here, I work, I practice, and it's all sort of in this nice little room and safe space, right, where I'm quite isolated. And there is that piece of me that wonders how it will feel to go back on stage. I have some live stream concerts coming up this spring, and I'm a little curious how shocking that will feel to step out of this little isolated bubble. Making yourself nervous just to go back to that true feeling of performing, and especially auditions, there is that nervous, excited energy that comes. You walk into the building and there's just students everywhere. And there's someone warming up next door and it's quite, active. There's sound everywhere. You're hearing Dvorak concerto and Rococo and all these pieces. It's a lot to take in. And when you're at home, to recreate the feeling of an audition, presence and style that you kind of would bring into a live audition, I think is something we have to work at. One of my students prints photos of the faculty that she knows will be at that particular audition. So maybe it's 3 or 4 faculty members, and she'll print their photos and hang them up. And I think part of that is really clever because it puts a very human connection to the teachers. They're people too. And as much as we completely admire them and love what they do and love how they share, it's a nice humanizing way to remember that they're people too, and they're looking for great students just as you're looking to play well. Just kind of picturing the faculty is helpful. There's the given of playing for friends and family a lot. Again, being isolated in our own space, sometimes things feel so good at home, right? You're totally prepared. And then someone steps in the room and it's not there anymore. That can happen. So play for everyone that's willing to listen. Have them start and stop you, sort of simulating an audition. All of that will be very helpful in the moment. There's also the classic running up and down the stairs, right, to get your heart pounding. I definitely have lots of energy and nervous but excited energy before I play. And so there's that feeling of wanting to get your heart rate up and then practice bringing it back down with breathing and loosening everything that you can, while still keeping that musical excitement. Running around a little bit, getting your heart pumping is not a bad way to simulate that feeling, even at home, even in your room. And of course, practicing in different rooms. So take your instrument, head to the bathroom, head to the kitchen, head to the garage, whatever. But don't just get stuck always practicing in that same spot in your room, which can be detrimental when it comes time to play, not only auditions, but for anyone once we can. And then once you're playing on Zoom, I think one hang up that we all have is that we don't know if we should really perform. There's that sort of feeling of, oh, it's a camera, it's really close to me, or I'm just playing to this little laptop, right? And it takes away that magic of the big hall or the big room. But in reality, even live auditions, sometimes you don't get a big space. Often as cellist, I remember at Juilliard, my audition was in a classroom with, I think it was, kind of shag green carpet at the time. And my audition at NEC was in Paul Katz's studio, where I believe there was carpet and then there were rugs on top of the carpet. And the panel was quite close. So really it's sort of the same feeling. You have to transcend this space. And so transcending the space, playing over the limitation that an online experience kind of can make you feel, will be really helpful in your auditions to really show what you have. And again, even in live auditions, you have to sort of transcend the room. You don't want to be staring the panel in the eye and worrying about what they're writing. You have to just get into your performance zone if you can, and really, really play. I would also really recommend hosting a true online performance before your auditions. With auditions, as you prepare for them, we know that probably they can only hear the exposition of this, or they're probably going to jump to the coda or hear the cadenza. And we start to kind of segment out our pieces. And the chance to really play your repertoire, I think, is just really important. To really perform the whole piece all the way through. And remember, you've done all this hard work on the piece in its entirety, and not just the 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there until the audition's over. So host that Zoom recital. One perk of COVID is people just aren't as busy. So just, ask family and friends, hey, next Saturday, can you tune in for an hour at 1 o'clock and hear me play through this? People will be thrilled to do that. Do it on Facebook Live, invite your friends. It's scary to put yourself out there, of course, but it's great practice, and it will really help. So another one is maybe a little controversial, but I think it's great. I think close to auditions, once you've done all this work, you've learned the pieces, your work is done, it's so polished, I think then it's fun to play along with recordings. And I say that mostly now that COVID is here, you might not have had access to, like I said, chamber and orchestra or an accompanist, right, to work on your pieces. And I think so much gets lost when we don't hear all the harmony, all the rhythm, all the pieces of the puzzle that go along with it. And so just kind of immersing yourself in a great recording. I love to plug in my phone and blast the music on the speakers and just kind of forget about all the little details that I've worked on and just really enjoy the music. Of course, you don't want to sit there copying the player, but I think just to, again, hear all the harmony and to really get the full context of the piece is super important. And there are apps now too, for sure, that you can use. I know one's called My Pianist, and it kind of moves along with you. If you rush, it rushes. If you pull back, it pulls back. I think there are tracks you can download. I think it's called Music -1 or something like that, where you can download just the orchestral part of a concerto. Of course, it's not going to follow you or be exactly your tempos, but again, it will be really immersive to hear, ooh, that's the flute line that I love, or the violins are in unison with me here. It's really, really valuable. So once you've done your work, I think feel free to enjoy playing along with that kind of recording or app. Another thing could be playing for a prospective teacher. And I would never recommend this terribly close to your audition. So if there's a month or so to go, you have time to contact someone. You never want to contact a teacher the week of the auditions. They're too busy. They're juggling their own teaching. They're juggling listening to all the recordings and meeting with new students, and just they have their own lives, So never contact them too close to the time. And also, if they were to be able to see you, it's not great to just try to change a lot of things, obviously, right before you audition. So if you can meet with a prospective teacher online a few weeks before, a month before, get some of their input, it can really help inspire you, because it's new feedback, not from your main teacher who's gotten you all this way, of course, but just a little bit of new information. And also, if you can take a few of their suggestions and implement them in time for your audition in a month, it really does show the teacher, they remembered, they listened, and they really took the time to implement some of my suggestions. And that always makes a great positive, connection. And again, it'll give you a little bit of that excitement to play for someone new and a push for some new ideas for your repertoire. And, if everything is polished and ready and you're 1 month out from auditions, I think you can afford to put your instrument down for a day, maybe 2, and pick up your headphones, pick up your score. And again, just sit and listen to a bunch of different recordings. You don't have to really take in anything that the soloist is doing if it's a concerto or, whatever. But I think to, again, go back to the score and sort of that same concept as like opening those huge elephant ears, pulling in, again, all that's going on behind you. If you're, playing Prokofiev's sonata, you could spend months studying the piano part, much less your part, right? So just really getting into the score and putting the instrument down and doing all the work here can be really inspiring and a nice change of pace. I know in orchestra, especially, I'm always sort of surprised when I'm busy leading a section. I'm cueing, I'm counting, I'm looking at the conductor, I'm checking with the concert mistress, you know, I'm busy. And sometimes we'll stop and the conductor will say, well, can you bring out the piccolo line? And I'm like, there's a piccolo, right? What? I'm too busy worrying about what I'm doing. And it always reminded me that I need to open my ears more and be more aware. And so again, putting your instrument down and becoming aware is a great tool. You know, doing a deep dive into some slow practicing section by section. It doesn't have to be hours and hours of work. Make a plan for the day. So today I want to get through this much of my Bach, and I really want to think about phrasing. I really want to think about bow speed and color and some harmony, and then put it down and let that be that. That'll help you get some work done. It doesn't require, like I said, hours and hours of sitting there, you know, crying over the analyzation of the score. I think it's more just about taking in all of those details as best you can and sort of implementing them before you get to your instrument. And then lastly, I would put your pieces away for a few days, especially, like I said, if you're super ready, there's no need to keep drilling them, playing them through over and over and over and over again every day. One thing I like to do when I get close to auditions is to take a day to play through something totally new that I'm looking forward to playing. And that might be a concerto or some Bach that I've never really perfected, or maybe a new Piatti Caprice or something. But something to look forward to remember, like this music, I'm in the final throes of learning it and presenting it and recording it. But on the other side, I get kind of this treat of learning new music, and I can't wait to get to this stuff. And that for a day or two, just to kind of cleanse your palate, you'll appreciate your repertoire once you get back to it a little bit more. Yeah, so those are some of my tips for keeping repertoire feeling not mundane and, you know, dried out by the time you get to the audition process. And I hope they're helpful. I see we have a few questions. Ooh, this is a good one. Can you please outline a process of preparation, practicing contemporary music in your audition? How important is contemporary music in one's total audition process? You know, it's a very good question. I'll admit that for me, back in the early audition days, it was sort of the piece I had to program. I was so much more excited to play my Elgar concerto or my sonata, which is you know, really too bad for me back in the day. And I think now more than ever, it's really important to make the contemporary piece a priority. The faculty does want to hear it. They will. It's not like, you know, sometimes they list scales and they're like, they may not get to that. They'll hear the contemporary piece. And I think it says a lot about you as a musician to invest in newer music. If it's possible, you know, programming works by female composers or, you know, people of color. It's really important to diversify our repertoire and to keep playing new music and not just playing the classics that we fall back on. So I would say definitely dive in and don't skip it. I don't think there's really an equation or a percentage of, you know, your Bach counts for this much and your concerto this much. I don't think they see it like that, but they certainly notice when something is less polished and less appreciated than the other pieces, and it doesn't look particularly good. So each school, if they list that contemporary piece, they want to hear it. And it's also a nice sign that a student really took that audition seriously. Their goal is to that school, they really would love to attend that school. And so they're going to play that specific requirement at a very, very high level. So yeah, I would definitely spend the time, make sure you're ready to go with that piece. Okay, what kind of piece do you think is right? I think his question is about repertoire that you're open to choosing for an orchestra audition. That's a great question. Yes, usually with the concerto part, it's Schumann or Dvorak. I have had auditions where that is an open-ended, kind of a piece you can choose. I don't know if it works for everyone, but for me, I'm always of the mindset that I want to choose a piece that I love to play, that feels as comfortable as sort of putting on your comfiest pair of jeans, because I know that I will be nervous, and I know that the pressure, especially after multiple rounds, will start to wear on me. And if it's a piece I'm not really feeling 100% with, I know that I won't play my best. So for me, as a teenager, for whatever reason, for about a 2-year period, every time I won a competition, it ended up being that I would play the Haydn C major concerto. And so I ended up playing it with orchestra around New England, the Hartford Symphony, lots of different great orchestras, about 8 times in a season one year. And so that piece for me is just always going to feel like that comfortable. It's always memorized. I could pull it out tomorrow and play it kind of piece. So if it's an open ask, I will almost always go to that. And if it's between Schumann or Dvorak, I think at that point it comes down to which one you feel better starting. For me, Dvorak is a little more, grit at the opening, and it makes me dig in and feel a little bit more comfortable. Haydn D, it's a little bit more elegant and refined at the opening. So if that's more of, an approach that you enjoy, then I think going with what feels great. Usually they don't, at least in the auditions I've taken, leave the piece completely up to your discretion. Usually it's a concerto. And when I've come across solo Bach, it's usually a prelude of any of the 6 suites. So again, that would come down to you. I remember taking the Montreal Symphony audition and going through a few rounds and hearing only the 3rd Bach suite backstage for whatever reason. Everyone was playing the Prelude of 3. I was playing the Prelude of 2. And later I thought, well, maybe that hurt me. Maybe I should have played 3. But in the end, I don't think it comes down to that. I think it comes down to sound. The conductor's picky, and as they should be. And I think any solo Bach well played is just a great, whatever you play best is what you should play. So I hope that answers your question. Can you discuss the process of developing your personal sound, character, and standing out in audition? Ooh, good question. Yeah, it's an interesting question. So basically, this question is, how do you create this beautiful sound and character without copying someone? As I've gotten older, maybe less wise, I'm not sure, but, kind of come into my own with playing. I used to think that my vibrato had to look a certain way. I used to think my bow hold had to look a certain way and be a certain way. And it really wasn't until well after leaving school that I gave myself the freedom to say, this perfect C-shaped bow hold grip isn't always the best for me. Sometimes I'm a little bit forward and sometimes I'm a little back. And, I gave myself the flexibility to not be in that perfect, technique that you learn maybe as a little Suzuki kid, which I did. And I think vibrato is a little like that too, in that, of course, there is unappealing vibrato, but also if maybe your vibrato is a hybrid of things that looks, is comfortable for you and sounds good to you, I think that's just fine. So for me, growing up, my first several influential teachers were very much wrist vibrato teachers. And so my vibrato was always quite turned in the wrist area. And so I would, when I studied with Aldo Periso at the Yale School of Music, he definitely did not approve of the wrist vibrato. So we went back and totally redid it as an arm vibrato. And it never felt totally natural to just change into a new person sound-wise. I knew I wanted to change from the wrist vibrato, but I also wasn't in love with the complete difference of sound. And it really wasn't until I went to NEC, and I remember in my like 15-minute trial lesson with Paul Katz, he said, what are you frustrated by? What would you want to work on if we studied, if you study with me? And I remember sort of getting like emotional because I was like, my vibrato, I'm so miserable because I don't want to be this, but I also don't want to be this. And I remember within a few lessons, I felt like I sort of had the key to the castle where I could figure it out. He gave me the tools and then left it to me to figure out the sound that I wanted. And that was a real gift. And then, again, it just takes time to find that sound. So I definitely don't think, you never want to copy someone, but of course, emulating beautiful sound there's no crime in that. So if you're someone who just loves that rich, meaty sound or that big vibrato, then work towards that. I don't think that anyone's going to accuse you of copying, Lynn Harrell or something. But, if you've ever seen Alyssa Weilerstein's Bohold, how flexible and how interesting it is, I think it just goes to show that this sort of idea of like perfect technique and fitting into a mold is not really always the best approach. So I would encourage you to just find what you love about the sound, what makes you feel at home at your instrument. When you get on stage, does it give you that feeling of freedom? And then that's your sound. And it might change over time. And that's a good thing, I think, hopefully for the better. A cellist pursuing a conducting degree. What are the best things to practice in order to maintain cello technique with limited time? So for me, that's scales. If there's one thing I can get to in a day, if I have a particularly full teaching day, like yesterday was seven hours, I didn't have a ton of time for myself, but I spent my first warm up just doing about 30 minutes of scales. I did the same thing again this morning, just kind of get warmed up. Another thing Paul Katz really gave me at NEC was a scale class, and our studio fought him on it enough because he wanted to do it at like 8 a.m. on Tuesday. So eventually he wore down and quit making us do it. But we did do it for a while. And I remember the very first day, he sort of went around and put us all on the spot. And I realized I didn't have solid fingerings for the scales. And I was embarrassed, as I should have been. And it motivated me to go home and work it out. And he gave me some really solid fingering advice that applied to almost every scale. And then it was just up to me to really sink in. And then once I gave in to practicing them religiously, now they're sort of like my favorite thing to practice. They're almost meditative, that I'm working on listening for overtones. I'm working on intonation. I'm working on different bow strokes, timing of shifts. Is my elbow working efficiently? Do I dip down when I go high up on the cello? Like, how's my posture? And then, from there, I'll do, octaves. I'll do thirds, arpeggios, all different things. And, Cello Mind, Hans Jensen's book, is another great resource. Lots of interesting sliding exercises, ear training exercises that, again, you don't have to sit down and play all the piatti caprices to stay in shape. I really think for me, it comes down to your scale routine. And during COVID, I have had a lot of fun going back to pauper etudes and going through them again. Finding a lot I skipped very intentionally back in the day and making myself play them. So, but for me, if I have limited time, I always go to a scale routine. Do you use positive thought or cognition to feel stronger, more resilient before and during the audition? Definitely. It's funny, I have all these little tricks that I do, and I'll just go ahead and tell you that one of them is during the audition. I'm not a big eat before an audition person. I'll eat what I have to not get jittery, but I don't really sit down and eat a big meal if I can avoid it. So one of my favorite tricks is to think about what I'm going to eat after. And so I remember being at NEC and thinking, ooh, after this, I'm going to go to Uno's next door and eat lunch. And I can't wait to eat lunch. So there was sort of just this feeling, and often with evening concerts, I'm quite hungry by 10 p.m. You know, I'm going to get back in the car and drive a long way home. So I'm looking forward to eating something. For me, it's just sort of this like little reward that you get after. And, you know, as a kid, I really never had stage anxiety ever. I would get up on stage at the Juilliard Theater, play Boccherini Concerto, no sweat. And then, you know, in my early 20s, it started to kind of hit me that I was very aware of who was in the room and how I was doing. And of course, when you audition for jobs or schools, there's sort of a little more riding on it. So we tend to put all this pressure. And so it came down to really realizing that, again, the panel, they're just people and they're lovely people. I remember at NEC, I was, I think it was for my graduate diploma, I had to play a jury, and it was on stage at Jordan Hall. And there was this huge table of all the, it was the cello faculty, I think the viola faculty, the double bass faculty, it was just felt like a ton of people. And I remember I played Dvorak Concerto, and I think Prokofiev Sonata and some Bach, maybe Dutilleux, a couple of different, really a challenging program. And I was so nervous. And after I stood up and kind of shaky, I played and I'm getting ready to leave. And I remember I can't remember who it was. It might have been Paul Katz or maybe Yi-Sun Kim, but somebody said, "Ellen, psst, come here." And I walk over the table and I'm thinking they're going to tell me something about my audition, like, "You played really well." But instead they said, "We've been in here so long. Can you go get us some coffee?" And so I was like, "Oh yeah, you're just people that have been sitting in this room for way too long and you need caffeine." And so I'm like writing down, you know, skim lattes and things like this, and I was still on stage. So I think it's really helpful as a student to remember that your purpose is to share the music. And if you don't get into that school, you weren't meant to go to that school. And, you know, finding your teacher, the connection there is the most important thing. So just remember when you walk into that room, yeah, do your breathing, whatever works for you, eat, don't eat, drink a lot of water. But remember that at the root of it, it's about, they want to hear beautiful music and you want to share beautiful music, and they're people. And it's not like walking the plank like it can feel sometimes. Could you give any tips on how to play freely within the meter of the music and at times mess with tempo, like taking extra time here or there while having it be acceptable to an audition panel? Ooh, that's a great question. You know, I guess when it comes to it, it would be a little bit dependent on the piece. When I'm teaching something like Elgar Concerto in the last movement, you know, at the opening, I tell my students, as you know, to be fairly free. If they've got a strong feeling about their interpretation, I'm going to let them be themselves, and I'm not going to dictate exactly how I would play it because I don't want them to copy it. I think for students, typically the hardest one to push and pull but stay in a pulse is Bach, any Bach. I wish as a student, again, I could go back and give myself the gift of the metronome. And of course it was always there, but I just didn't want to use it. But Bach is actually so much easier when the metronome is on, and then you practice it so diligently within the confines of that beautiful pulse, which normally I think our tendencies to pull until things get heavy and overweight. And of course, so many special harmonies. We want to make everything so beautiful, and really in the end, it just gets bogged down. So go back to your metronome. And then after the metronome work is there and everything is just clean slate, everything is organized, I would go through and find the notes and the harmony that are really, really special. And they'll be a dime a dozen because it's Bach and it's incredible writing. So find the ones that are really, really special to you, and then make sure you're pulling or stretching or emphasizing in a way that, you know, maybe pulls a little bit, but then goes right back into the bigger sense of pulse. Yeah, I think with Bach, that's fairly important, and really well-studied Bach doesn't need to get slower and heavier and, you know, thicker vibrato and all these things that we fall into the trap of by trying to make it special. It's already special. And your job is to keep the bigger sense of pulse. So would be a little dependent on the music, but be as musical as you can be without losing the sense of forward motion and pulse. Really does show a very mature musician. So many great questions. Could you talk about how to phrase and make musical ideas obvious and communicative to the listener? I'm having trouble with this, especially in Bach. I think kind of, writing on what I just said about pulse, I remember I had a lesson one time with Clive Greensmith, who is someone I really look up to and worked with a little bit at Yale when the Tokyo String Quartet used to be in residence. And I remember going to have a lesson on the prelude of the second Bach suite, and it was supposed to be an hour. And I didn't look at my phone, and we just worked. And when I came out, I had missed all these calls because my mom was looking for me because it was a 3-hour lesson. And we had just gotten so engrossed in the work. And he had just basically told me to like scrap what I was doing because I, again, was just adding too much romantic tendency and trying to make everything special, and it was just getting bogged down, and all my bones were only working for that type of interpretation. So we just sort of scratched it and went back over it, and I've kept my copy of that from that lesson. It's marked up, and it's really special to me to go back and realize that like it was sort of this moment where I thought, oh yeah, the pulse and the metronome and moving forward really will make this more musical. So really thinking that bigger picture, always finding what the big pulse is, no matter what movement you're in, is super important. And if you're a person who likes to move as a performer, I think you can always use that to your musical advantage within reason. If you're a person who can really lean into a bow change, you can move a little bit in your torso, you're not tight. Sometimes people just visually can follow what you're doing musically. I get a lot of comments on my face. I'm very expressive when I perform, so people always know how I'm feeling. It can be problematic when I'm watching myself back. I don't love it, but people do seem, even in orchestra, I've had people come up and say, wow, I felt like I kind of understood that Dvorak symphony because of, how you were expressing your face. So I think if you're a person within reason that likes to move or express, visibly, that's always nice. But communicating, I think as long as you have the idea, what's important again is to record yourself and make sure that that idea is actually coming across. I remember, playing for Paul Katz a few times and feeling like I was just emoting myself crazy. I was just leaving it all out there, and I was breaking a sweat, and he would be like, I think it could be more musical. And I'd be like, what? I was like trying so hard. And it was because it was all here and it wasn't really coming out. So my best advice would be to make sure to record yourself. And if something needs more enunciation musically, whether that's a little different vibrato, a different bow speed, a much more obvious lean into a phrase, I would experiment. Yeah. What do I think about students taking a gap year before audition? This year's kind of an interesting time for all of the obvious reasons. And I think a gap year can be a nice idea, dependent on how you use the time. A lot of students see it and they think, oh, I'm just gonna sit in my room and I'm gonna crack down on technique. I'm gonna practice so much. And then what happens is you get a little bored after a while. You don't have the social outlets of school, and your friends are off at school, and it can be sort of this lost middle time. But if you have a particularly great teacher that you're planning, okay, we're gonna have 2 lessons a week, we're gonna have this studio class every month, I'm gonna go here and play for this teacher. If you've got all these plans in place to really ensure that it's effective time and not just lost time, I think it can be a great thing. This year, it wasn't for everybody to go to school, even if they got in. There were so many barriers to getting to the schools, to getting enough financial aid, knowing where to live, getting testing regularly. There were just so many barriers. And so I think, when it was right for students to go, they did. And hopefully anybody who it wasn't the right year, just took the time to really invest. And if you didn't get into the school you really wanted to study with, at, or with the teacher you really want to work with, I think taking a gap year can be a great time to really buckle down and really get to work on the things that didn't go well for your auditions, and to try again instead of settling for a school you really don't want to attend. that isn't inspiring to you, a gap year would probably be preferable in that case. So I think it can be useful. It depends on the situation, maybe. How do I cope with the lack of concerts? How is the main way to keep myself in shape and motivated? Whew, these are tough questions. You know, I'll admit at the very beginning of the pandemic, I actually thought, wow, this is my time. I'm going to play all the etudes in the world. And I did. And I actually felt like for a few months I was in the best shape ever, you know, all dressed up with nowhere to go, sort of. And then after a few months of that, it was very hard for me to keep practicing. I was very discouraged, sort of just overwhelmed. Everything had changed so fast, and just seeing, I had all these, this year in particular, I had really fun concerts on the, you know, on the calendar, and it just was like somebody just took an eraser and got rid of all of it. But you know, what really kept me going this year was honestly my students. I teach about 20 private students, and I opened my garage and I cleaned it out, and I set up a cello studio in my garage, and it had this big door on the front, big door on the back, so lots of ventilation, and we were, you know, 10 feet apart. And I got to see my students, and they not only, no one quit lessons. Everyone either did it online or came to the garage. Some people started taking multiple lessons a week, just because it was a great way to use the time. And my high schoolers started having virtual studio class where everyone could finally attend because we had nowhere else to go. And their progress was super inspiring to me. And so it really motivated me to get back to getting in shape. So I personally, like I said, scales are sort of my go-to for staying in shape. Piatti caprices, pauper etudes, concertos, just kind of playing through the pieces that I genuinely love to play and miss playing. And playing along with recordings. That's not just for students. I miss playing chamber music a lot. So for me, having the other partners there is great, even if it's on, you know, a recording. So, you know, for me to keep in shape, what I'm coping with is that I think it's a time that we all have to push ourselves. And, you know, if I could look back and tell myself what the skills I needed as a musician, conservatory is a beautiful training ground for a musician, and you can't skip the practicing part. The time in the practice room is a non-negotiable. But as a young student, you're going to need lots of other skills. And this time period was pushing me, you know, to host a 2-week workshop from around the world online. It was a huge challenge. Marketing, advertising, running webinars, you know, all these things I never saw myself doing, and now I'm doing, and it's just a different use of a different skill set. But it's great to feel like I'm pushing to try new things. But yes, I'm so looking forward to going back on stage and just seeing some people in the audience. I think it will be a really emotional experience, probably for all musicians, because it's going to feel like we're finally getting back home after a long time. Do you have tips for making a great pre-screening video that passes the round? I haven't been getting the results I wanted, and I'm feeling discouraged. Totally sympathize. Yeah, you know, it's a strange year in so many ways. There's a lot of students who did take a gap year, so maybe there's even more applicants than normal. For my own workshop, it was the first year where most students didn't come in with the list of NEC, Juilliard, Colburn, Curtis, you know, the usual top big schools that they were dying to get into. Most of the students were like, what kind of university would give me a dual degree? Or where can I study that I'll get a really, really great, undergraduate educational experience, as well as a great teacher and a great orchestra. So it's a strange year. When it comes down to making tips for a pre-screen, again, I think it's about really showing who you are, really, really performing. On the surface level, make sure that your sound, your audio quality is really high, your video quality is really high, and that your background is clean, neat, not distracting. I know that sounds really practical, but I can't tell you how many videos I get both for UVM and the workshop where there's dirty laundry is the worst, and I see it all the time. I don't understand why it's so hard to clean up your room. So dirty laundry, make sure it's not there. Or I've seen dogs and cats walk by or bark. I've heard cell phones ringing, microwaves dinging, you name it. And so I think just to make sure that in the few minutes that each teacher has to watch, that everything you're presenting is a student that they would really like to teach, from, you know, your setting, your care of the presentation, and your playing. Obviously, just be yourself. And then I really don't say this lightly. I think everybody ends up where they're supposed to be. And if you're going into undergrad, you've got time for master's and grad diploma and doctorate. You've got lots of time to study at a variety of schools. So just keep pushing to really say something, be yourself, and the right teacher is gonna see that and get connected, and it'll work out. Oh, some thank yous. Thank you, that's so sweet. Do I have exercise to get control of your vibrato? Ooh. I've understood the foundations, but my arm has a tendency to vibrate faster than I intend, and I find that the vibrato is often an autopilot. Ah, yes. I've dealt with this with a lot of my students. I can tell you my tricks for sort of just the basics for how I teach vibrato. You've probably covered these, but I'll quickly share. When a vibrato is kind of going off on its own, I find that it's probably a habit that you're falling into, something that's just happening without your total control. So to kind of, it's painful experience to unlearn something. I remember at Yale when I was unlearning the wrist vibrato, I had to play the swan for about 5 or 6 months. And, you know, that's, first of all, very embarrassing. I was like the person playing the swan when everyone else was playing the 6-box. You know, it's like not great. But also just so frustrating and such slow work. So knowing that it's going to take some time and there's a commitment to unlearning and relearning. So give yourself the space to sound not great, and to be frustrated. My advice to my students who are unlearning that fast, terrible, tight vibrato is to not use vibrato for a while and train your fingers to work without the reactionary vibrato. And then when you do get back to vibrato, some of my favorite tips are starting just putting your finger on the string and lightly running your finger from first to fourth. And I'm not pressing at all. You can hear sort of the singing of the string as you shimmy your hand up and down. And I'm working, my thumb is guiding right under my finger, and I'm working this muscle, my bicep up here. And after a few minutes of doing that, you'll feel like you're doing an arm workout, which is great. It's exactly what you want. You want to activate the muscle. So you're being conscientious about using it. And then from fourth, I usually teach to go to third. So you're shortening the space. After a minute in third, go to second, just a smaller space. And that would be the first, kind of exercise I would start with, and I wouldn't push to go past that for maybe a week. And again, it's going to feel really slow. And for the rest of the time, try not to use vibrato. And then after that exercise, I start to bring that first finger down a little bit harder onto the string from first to second position. And you might try starting with some very unpleasant slides. And you're just gonna, again, keep this muscle activated, and then you start speeding them up. And eventually you center in and sort of pretend like you're moving your finger, but you're grounded. But you can see my upper arm is still moving. And then I have more control. And of course, if I want faster, I can speed up or I can slow it down. But again, it's sort of unlearning that bad habit of one size fits all speedy vibrato. It's very, very challenging to undo. So just be patient. Try some of these exercises. I know people use like egg shakers. Some people practice on their arm. There's all sorts of great tricks online. And I certainly didn't come up with any of these. I've taken them from other successful teachers, but that really did help me. And one last thing, Paul Katz used to say, just you know, kind of shake the arm, make a big motion, because the bigger the motion, the harder it is to get tight and small. If it's a small motion, it will stay that size and speed. But if you're really, really shaking, go wild with this muscle, your vibrato will widen, and it won't feel natural at all for a while, but eventually it'll come around. Just be patient with yourself. What kind of warm-up exercises can you suggest? Ooh, so many good ones. Again, you know, not to harp on scales, but I'm really a fan of starting, you know, just slow, really steady bow. Sometimes just intentionally using vibrato on every note, and other times absolutely no vibrato. So I'll go through all my keys in all different speed, different bowings. I like to do the octave slides very gently, just kind of getting to know my fingerboard in the morning. And you know, arpeggios are great too if you're, you know, once you get warmed up. And sometimes I just hang out on one string and just kind of get the vibrato feeling comfortable. I'll start really slow. Again, it's almost meditative. You're just relaxing into the sound and also each finger until I'm happy with how it feels. I'm feeling comfortable, settled. And then I'll do each string that way. You know, every string can have a little bit of a different hand and arm angle, and you know, just getting warmed up. So for me, going to those routines is really key. And once I've got that, I feel like I can play anything all day, even if I didn't really have time to pull it back out, you know, Haydn D major concerto that day or that week. As long as I'm warmed up properly, I feel like I can hang through the other things. In what ways does playing professionally in a professional orchestra affect the way you play and practice individually? Really good question. Interesting. You know, in my experience, I've played in a few orchestras. I toured with, you know, the Vermont Symphony on their summer tour. I won my first orchestra job when I finished kind of a little bit after. I was actually at NEC. It was the New Haven Symphony in Connecticut. A lovely group. It's a beautiful hall. Kind of felt like going home because I was used to playing there, of course, going to Yale. I will say with that orchestra, I didn't put as much time in as I should have. You know, I was a section player. I looked at the parts, of course, but sort of just felt like I was immersed in the back. I loved the sound. I loved the conductor, and it was a lot of fun. But for being a principal, I practice much more efficiently and much more carefully. I tend to print our season and all the things I need to learn and put it up on the wall, and then give myself little markers of time for when I need to start things. Because a lot of the repertoire I have not played, especially the big solos. So for me, I practice really vigilantly. I'm the metronome, listening to recordings, score study. I ask friends who have orchestra jobs in, you know, big orchestras across the world, and I play little audio clips on my phone and text them and say, like, is this right? What would you say about this? And I practice cueing and I practice counting very much more rigorously, knowing that a whole section is, you know, relying on me to come in confidently, and that I need to be able to look at the score, connect with my fellow players, but also, you know, check in with the conductor or soloist. So my work is definitely more efficient now that I have that position. How do you provide a better foundation to your chamber ensemble sound as the cellist? I've always struggled with balance, when to play more, when to play less. Ooh. You know, every player sort of has their individual sound. I've always been told I have a pretty, you know, that I'm a cellist, like you have to kind of have a strong sound to play with my strong sound. So I don't know if that's a compliment or not, I'm not sure. But some people sort of have a more treble sound, and some people have that really heavy lower end sound. In a chamber ensemble, I think it depends a little bit on the type of ensemble. Right now I'm playing in a piano trio, and I don't feel so responsible for the cushion of sound. I really rely on the piano to provide that. And I feel like I get to collaborate with both of them, but also be myself and a soloist in a way. If you're in a quartet, that's a totally different story, clearly. You really are the bottom of the sound, and you're the bass, the cushion, and also the heart of the intonation. Everyone's going to be adjusting to you. So I think to practice that, it takes a lot of time with your fellow ensemble players to decide, okay, you really, really enjoyed this type of sound, and to play a little bit more on the delicate, lighter side, and you really enjoy a little bit, tighter sound, more driven sound. How do I fit into the equation? And so I think it kind of comes down to living with that for a while. If you're a newer ensemble, don't worry too much. It will, I think with time, you're gonna find your place. And it's always a little bit of a negotiation, right? Even at the highest level of ensemble, you're gonna have these arguments over, you're playing too loudly, or I need more support. And so it's really the collaboration part is always there, and the give and take, and just giving when you need, and realizing that you're just on stage, and with time, you're gonna find each other's voices and really learn where you fit in. How has your perspective as a musician and artist changed throughout your career? So much. It's hard to even say in a short time frame. I always tell the story. When I was at Juilliard, I started in the pre-college in 8th grade, and I was from New Hampshire, and New York was so thrilling, and Juilliard, I'd read about Juilliard and thought like, oh, it's the most magical place ever. And I remember, this was before email, not to date myself, but I got my first chamber ensemble assignment, and it said, you're playing the Mendelssohn D minor piano trio, go to room 200 and wait for your coach. And so I'm sitting there, and we're all awkward and nervous, and the door opens, and in comes Itzhak Perlman. And I remember thinking, I must be dreaming. This can't really be happening. But really, it felt like Juilliard, especially at that age, that really pivotal time, it was just like the world was my oyster. I felt like I was going to be Jacqueline du Pré. There was no question in my mind that that's where I was headed. And, I don't regret that kind of optimism and just love of the music. I remember just feeling obsessed with repertoire. Like concertos would get in my head, and I would sort of play them in my fingers when I wasn't at my instrument, and I would think about them, and they would get stuck in my head, and I was always listening to CDs. And then, with time, school is hard, and the life of a musician is challenging. No one came up to me and told me I could solo with any orchestra. I wanted to have a solo career. It was just shocking. So, when I left school, I definitely had my bumps here and there. And with time, though, I think what I found is that my favorite type of career is a lot of little things put together. I love teaching, and that passion, I had my first student at 15, and that's really never left. Running a workshop is something I always, thought would be fun, and I love doing. I always wanted to have a principal job of some type. So, I love having that job. I love taking that responsibility. And really, I just love sharing the music. I love orchestra music. I love chamber music. I'm thrilled to do it all. So there's this sort of feeling of just peace with where I've come, and happiness that, I didn't need to be Jacqueline du Pré to be satisfied and to have a lovely career. But it looks nothing like what I thought. So with time, all of that will change. Yeah. Well, it looks like we've run out of time. I so appreciate everyone tuning in. I loved answering your questions, and look forward to connecting with you at a future time, possibly in person. And please all stay well. Happy New Year.